Commander Yuki had been working the night shift at the Galactic Communications Array for over 20 cycles. But nothing had prepared him for what appeared on his screens that fateful evening. The massive communication dish, floating in the dead space between star systems, suddenly erupted with activity as an unknown signal punched through the fabric of subspace itself. The transmission was unlike anything in the galactic database. It carried raw power, cutting through interference that would normally block standard communications. Yuki's reptilian features twisted with confusion as he analyzed the signal's origin point. His computer systems immediately flagged it with a warning that made his blood run cold. Sector 7G. The Forbidden Zone. Technician Nara, get over here immediately, Yuki called to his assistant, his voice carrying an urgency that made several other crew members look up from their stations. Nara's tentacled form glided across the bridge. Her multiple appendages, already reaching for the analysis equipment before she even reached his station, her species had evolved excellent multitasking abilities, and she began running diagnostics while Yuki explained what he was seeing. "Sir, this is impossible," she whispered, her tentacles trembling as the data flowed across her screens. "Ow. Signal is coming from a Class 12 death world. Nothing lives on Class 12 worlds. The environmental conditions are too extreme for any known form of life." But the data didn't lie. The biometric signatures embedded in the transmission clearly showed carbon-based life forms. Not just any life forms, but intelligent ones. The readings indicated creatures that had somehow evolved on a planet where surface temperatures swung wildly from deadly cold to scorching heat. The atmospheric data showed storms so powerful they could literally tear apart entire cities. Most shocking of all was the gravitational information. The planet's gravity was nearly double what most galactic species could survive. It should have crushed any developing life forms before they could even begin to evolve complex thought processes. Yuki's scaled skin began to change color, a natural response his species had when faced with something that challenged their understanding of the universe. "Run the encryption analysis again," he ordered, hoping the computers had made an error. They hadn't. The mathematical precision of the signal's encoding was flawless. Not only were these creatures intelligent, but they possessed technology advanced enough to send coherent messages across impossible distances. The signal had traveled through areas of space that should have scattered and destroyed any normal transmission. Within hours, emergency protocols activated throughout the galactic communication network. The signal was forwarded to every major hub, translated by the best linguistic computers, and finally transmitted to the Galactic Council's emergency chambers. Representative Khan, a dignified member of the Altarian species, called an immediate emergency session. Council members from 12 different worlds gathered in the Great Chamber, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes as they took their positions. When the translation finally came through, the entire chamber fell silent. The message was broadcast through universal translators, and its simplicity made it even more terrifying. "This is Earth. We need help. They're coming." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Someone, somehow, had evolved intelligence on one of the most dangerous worlds ever discovered, and now they were calling for help against something that was apparently even more dangerous than their impossible planet. The greatest rescue mission in Galactic history was about to begin. Admiral Taro stood on the bridge of the massive dreadnought Harmony, watching through the viewport as the largest rescue fleet in galactic history assembled around his flagship. Ships of every size and design floated in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming under the light of distant stars. Never before had 12 different species worked together on such a scale. The sight was breathtaking. Sleek Altarian cruisers, hung alongside the bulky, practical vessels of the mining guilds, delicate science ships from the academic worlds formed protective clusters near the heavily armored warships of the military core worlds. Each species had contributed their best vessels, creating a fleet that represented the combined might of half the galaxy. But Taro knew this wasn't just about military power. This was about something far more important. For the first time in recorded history, ancient enemies were flying side by side. Species that had fought territorial wars for centuries now shared the same mission. The mysterious distress call from the impossible world had done what decades of diplomacy couldn't achieve. "Admiral, incoming data from the Science Division," called his communications officer. Taro nodded and watched as the information appeared on his command screens. "Captain," Massey's voice came through the speakers from her medical frigate Lifeline. Her ship was specially designed to handle medical emergencies for multiple species, equipped with treatment facilities that could adapt to almost any known biology. But even she sounded troubled as she delivered her report. "Sir, I've been reviewing what little data we have on these humans," she began, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. "Their physical structure is unlike anything we've encountered. Their bone density is 3 times what we consider normal for intelligent species. Most of our people would be crushed under the weight of their own skeletons." She paused, and Taro could hear the rustling of papers in the background as she double-checked her readings. "Their muscle fiber compositions suggest they developed under extremely high gravity conditions, but that's not the strangest part." The bridge crew leaned forward, listening intently. Even the usually chattering bridge technicians had gone quiet. "Their immune systems appear to be designed for constant warfare," Captain Hannah continued. "Not just against normal diseases, but against biological threats on a planetary scale. It's as if their entire evolutionary history was spent fighting off attacks that would wipe out entire populations of other species." Chief Science Officer Wook looked up from his analysis station, his large eyes wide with amazement. "Deathworld evolution," he muttered, speaking the words that everyone was thinking. "If these readings are accurate, these humans aren't just intelligent life forms. They're living weapons shaped by millions of years of surviving on a planet that was actively trying to kill them." The implications were staggering. Every species in the galaxy had evolved on worlds that supported life. But humans had apparently evolved on a world that opposed life at every turn, and they had not just survived but thrived. "Fleet status report," Admiral Taro ordered, pushing aside his amazement to focus on the mission ahead. "All vessels report. Ready for jump, sir," came the response. Medical supplies loaded and secured. Defense systems armed and operational. Taro took one last look at his incredible fleet. In the cargo holds below, medical supplies designed for 12 different species sat carefully organized next to enough military firepower to level a small moon. They were prepared for anything. "All ships engage jump drives," he commanded. "Destination, the unknown system. 3-cycle journey begins now." The stars stretched into lines as the greatest rescue mission in galactic history began. The moment the rescue fleet dropped out of hyperspace, Admiral Taro knew they had entered something far beyond a simple rescue mission. The space around them erupted with flashing lights, explosions, and the twisted wreckage of battles that defied everything he understood about warfare. Human vessels moved through the combat zone like deadly dancers, their ships designed with curves and angles that seemed to bend the laws of physics. These weren't the bulky, practical designs that most species use for space travel. These ships looked like they had been built by artists who understood that beauty and lethality could exist in the same frame. But it wasn't the ships that caught everyone's attention. It was what they were fighting: crystalline entities, the size of small moons drifted through space, their surfaces reflecting the light of explosions in rainbow patterns. That would have been beautiful if they weren't so terrifying. These creatures, or machines, or whatever they were, moved with purpose and intelligence. Worse yet, they were literally eating the human ships. Navigator Yoon pressed his face against the viewport, his usually steady voice dropping to a whisper. "By the void, those things are consuming the whole metal directly. They're turning the ships into part of themselves." Admiral Taro watched in fascination and horror as one of the crystal entities extended tendrils that wrapped around a human frigate. Where the tendrils touched, the ship's armor began to dissolve and flow into the creature's body, making it larger and stronger. But the humans weren't running. They weren't even retreating. Instead, Taro watched as a human destroyer suddenly changed course, accelerating directly toward the crystal entity that was consuming their frigate. The ship's engines glowed brighter and brighter as it built up. Speed, heading straight for what looked like certain destruction. "They're going to collide," gasped Weapons Officer Kira from her station.
"Oh."
"That's suicide." The human destroyer slammed into the crystal entity's core at full speed, and the explosion that followed lit up the entire battlefield. The crystal creature cracked like glass, splitting into thousands of pieces that drifted away into space. But before anyone could celebrate, 3 more human ships appeared from different directions, swarming the wounded entity and finishing it off with concentrated weapons fire. The bridge crew stood in stunned silence. They had just watched someone sacrifice their entire ship and crew to create an opening for their allies. It was tactical brilliance and absolute madness rolled into one moment. "Sir, incoming transmission communications officer," Nari announced, her voice shaking slightly. "It's from a human vessel called the Defiance." "Put it through," Admiral Taro ordered, straightening his uniform and preparing for first contact with these impossible warriors. The main screen flickered to life. A human face appeared. The commander was clearly male, with short dark hair and features that would have been handsome if not for the fresh scars across his left cheek and the blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. His uniform was torn and stained, suggesting he had been fighting for hours or maybe days. But what made several bridge crew members actually step backward wasn't the injuries or the exhaustion. It was his expression. The human was grinning, not just smiling, but showing teeth in a way that reminded everyone present of predators they had seen in nature documentaries. Well, the human commander said, his voice carrying an accent that the universal translators couldn't quite process. "Looks like the cavalry finally arrived. I'm Commander Day of the Defiance. Are you folks here to help us kill these crystal monsters? Or are you just planning to watch the show?" The casual tone, combined with his battle-scarred appearance, and that unsettling grin, created a moment that would be remembered by every crew member present. They were looking at their first human. He was treating a life-or-death battle like it was just another day at work. Medical officer, Jean had seen combat footage from dozens of different species throughout her career, but nothing had prepared her for what she was witnessing on the tactical displays. Her multiple eyes tracked the movements of human soldiers as they moved across the surfaces of the crystal entities. And what she saw defied every principle of space warfare she had ever learned. The humans were conducting boarding operations in the vacuum of space using equipment that looked primitive compared to standard galactic military gear, while other species required massive powered armor suits with energy shields and life support systems that could sustain them for days. These humans were fighting in simple metal environmental suits that barely seemed thick enough to hold an atmosphere. "Admiral Taro, you need to see this," Jin called out, her voice filled with a mixture of horror and amazement. "The human boarding parties have successfully breached 3 separate crystal entities. But sir, they're doing it with equipment that shouldn't work." She pulled up detailed readings on her medical scanner, showing the environmental conditions where the humans were fighting. The temperature readings in those areas show extremes that would instantly freeze the blood of most species. The radiation levels alone should have killed them within minutes. Yet they're not just surviving, they're maintaining combat effectiveness. Admiral Taro moved to her station, studying the data with growing disbelief. The humans weren't using energy weapons like every other civilized species. Instead, they carried what appeared to be projectile weapons that fired small metal objects at high speed. It was the kind of technology most species had abandoned thousands of years ago when they developed energy-based warfare. "Look at this," Jin continued, pointing to a section of her display where a human soldier was moving across the surface of a crystal entity. No magnetic boots, no safety tethers, no backup life support. He's basically floating in space with nothing but a thin metal suit and a primitive weapon. As they watched, disaster struck. The crystal entity's surface suddenly shifted, and the human soldier was thrown into open space. His environmental suit had been punctured by crystal shards, and atmosphere was venting out invisible streams. "He's dead," whispered Tactical Officer Sung from his position. "Suit, breach and hard vacuum. Even our best emergency systems couldn't save someone from that. But the human didn't die. Instead, he did something that made the entire bridge crew stare in stunned silence." The soldier activated a small thruster pack on his back and used his uncontrolled trajectory to aim himself at another crystal entity. As he flew through space, trailing atmosphere in what looked like blood, he pulled out an explosive device. By the ancestors, breathed Navigator Yoon. He's using his own death as a weapon.
The human soldier slammed into the second crystal
entity and detonated his explosive at the moment of impact. The blast cracked the creature's surface, creating an opening that 3 other human soldiers immediately used to board and destroy it from within. They're not just surviving conditions that should kill them, Tactical Officer Sung observed, his voice filled with awe. They are turning those deadly conditions into advantages. That soldier used vacuum exposure and a fatal trajectory as a combat tactic. Captain Hannah's voice crackled over the communication system from her medical frigate. Jin, I'm monitoring the vital signs of the human boarding parties. Their heart rates are elevated to levels that should cause cardiac arrest. In most species, their adrenaline readings are off the charts. Any other species would be experiencing complete organ failure right now. She paused, and they could hear the amazement in her voice at their maintaining perfect tactical coordination. Their combat precision is actually improving as their stress levels increase. Jin, what kind of evolutionary pressure creates warriors like this? Medical Officer Jin stared at her readings, trying to process what she was seeing. Captain, I think we're looking at a species that evolved on a world where extreme stress and mortal danger were daily experiences. Their bodies aren't just adapted to survive impossible conditions, they're designed to perform better under them. The bridge fell silent as everyone contemplated the implications. They weren't just witnessing a rescue mission anymore. They were watching evolution's ultimate warriors in action. It was both inspiring and terrifying to behold. Admiral Taro's diplomatic shuttle shuddered as it descended through Earth's atmosphere, the hull groaning under pressures that would have crushed lighter vessels. Through the reinforced viewports, he could see a world that challenged everything he thought he knew about planetary habitability. The blue and green marble below looked deceptively beautiful from space, but the closer they got, the more terrifying. It became Dr. Yan, the mission's chief xenobiologist, frantically worked her instruments with all 4 of her trembling appendages. Her species had evolved on a peaceful world with stable weather patterns, and what she was reading made her question the accuracy of her equipment. Admiral, these readings can't be correct, she said, her voice filled with disbelief. The atmospheric pressure down there is nearly twice what most of our species can survive. The radiation levels from their sun would cause cellular damage within hours.
Ow.
And the chemical composition of their atmosphere includes gases that are literally poisonous to half the species in our fleet. But the instruments weren't malfunctioning. As they descended further, the truth became undeniable. This wasn't just a death world according to galactic standards. This was the ultimate death world, a planet so hostile that it made other dangerous worlds look like peaceful garden colonies. The shuttles, environmental systems, worked overtime to maintain safe conditions for the diplomatic team while outside. The hull and electrical storm raged with enough power to vaporize most spacecraft. Lightning bolts larger than some space stations crackled across the sky, and the wind speeds registered at levels that would tear apart most buildings the galactic delegation had ever seen. How is there a city down there? Whispered the Altarian ambassador, pointing to a sprawling human settlement that stretched as far as the eye could see. The city looked not just inhabited, but thriving, with millions of humans going about there. Daily lives as if they weren't living in conditions that would be considered a catastrophic disaster on any other world. When they finally landed at the designated meeting point, the diplomatic team required full environmental suits just to step. Outside their shuttle, the humans who greeted them wore simple clothing that offered no protection whatsoever from what the galactic visitors considered a lethal environment. Their guide introduced himself as Day, a cheerful young human who seemed completely unbothered by the fact that his world was actively trying to kill everyone on it. He led them through the city streets, pointing out various landmarks while casually mentioning details that made the diplomatic team's translators work overtime. Beautiful day today, Day commented as they walked past a group of human children. Playing in a park? Pretty mild weather for this time of year? It's only about 30 degrees Celsius, humidity around 60%, and the winds barely hitting 40 kilometers per hour. Dr. Yin's instruments immediately began flashing warning signals. The temperature would cause heat stroke in most species within minutes. The humidity levels were toxic to her people. The wind speeds he called barely noticeable would topple. Most spacecraft, if they tried to land in it, your children play outside in these conditions, she asked, watching in amazement, as young humans ran and laughed in what her equipment registered as an environmental hazard zone. Of course, Day replied, looking puzzled by the question. Why wouldn't they? It's not like there's a storm or anything dangerous happening. As they continued the tour, they passed a human jogger who waved cheerfully as she ran past. Dr. Yin's readings showed that the woman was exercising in atmospheric conditions that would cause immediate respiratory failure in most galactic species, and she was doing it for fun. I have to ask, Dr. Yan said, stopping to look directly at their human guide. Your people actually evolved here? On this world? In these conditions? Day paused, seeming to consider the question seriously for the first time.
Then he shrugged.
In that uniquely human gesture that the diplomatic team was beginning to recognize? Well, yeah. I mean, Mom always used to say that Earth was trying to kill us every single day. We just got really stubborn about not dying. A simple statement. Hit the diplomatic team like a physical blow. These humans hadn't just survived on their impossible world. They had made surviving look so routine, so normal, that they considered it a mild inconvenience, rather than a daily miracle. They were looking at a species that had been forged by millions of years of planetary warfare. Somehow they had emerged not bitter or broken, but cheerful and welcoming to strangers from the stars. The diplomatic meeting aboard the human orbital station had been proceeding smoothly when the universe decided to remind everyone that peace was fragile. The crystal entities struck without any warning, their scout ships appearing from hyperspace like deadly ghosts, materializing from nightmare. The first impact shook the entire station, sending diplomats from 6 different species scrambling for cover as emergency alarms began wailing throughout the corridors. What had been a calm discussion about trade agreements and cultural exchange suddenly became a fight for survival as the station's hull began buckling under the assault. Mina found herself thrown against a bulkhead as another explosion rocked the station. Through the chaos, she could see sections of the outer ring collapsing, with debris floating in the artificial gravity fields like deadly confetti. The beautiful view of Earth through the observation windows was now obscured by wreckage and the ominous shapes of crystal attackers in the confusion. She heard voices calling for help from what remained of the conference room. 3 members of the galactic diplomatic team had been trapped when a support beam collapsed, pinning them beneath twisted metal and sparking electrical systems. Mina expected the humans to prioritize evacuating their own people first. It was standard protocol across the galaxy. When disaster struck, you saved your own species first, then helped others if time and resources allowed. It was logical, practical, and had been the accepted approach to emergency situations for thousands of years, but the humans did something that challenged everything she understood about survival instincts. 2 human engineers, Hyun and Kyung, appeared at the wreckage site carrying tools that looked like they had been grabbed from a maintenance closet. Without hesitation, without even checking if any humans needed rescue first, they dove headfirst into the dangerous debris field to reach the trapped aliens. Why are they doing this? Mina asked Medical Officer Jin, who had arrived with an emergency medical kit. They don't even know those people. They met them for the first time yesterday. Jin watched the 2 humans work with tools that were never designed for rescue operations. Kyung was using what appeared to be a metal cutting torch to slice through a beam that was pinning down Dr. Yin, while Hyun crawled into a space so small and dangerous that it would have been considered suicide for most species. Pack bonding, Jin replied, her voice filled with amazement and something that might have been tears. I've read about it in the preliminary reports, but seeing it in action is something else entirely. These humans have somehow adopted our entire diplomatic team into their social structure. She pointed to where Kyung was working, his movements precise despite the danger. In their minds, we stopped being aliens the moment we shared a meal with them yesterday. We're not strangers anymore. We're family. The rescue effort continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Kuhn managed to free Dr. Yan from the wreckage, but as he lifted her to safety, a piece of sharp metal tore through his environmental suit. Atmosphere began venting out in a visible stream. Mina could see that he was in serious trouble, but instead of seeking immediate medical attention for himself, Kuhn carefully carried Dr. Yan to the medical area where Jin was waiting. His face was already showing signs of oxygen deprivation, his movements becoming unsteady as his suit continued to leak precious air. "Take care of her first," he insisted, gently placing Dr. Yan on the emergency medical bed. "She's hurt worse than I am." The human medical team tried to work on both patients simultaneously, but Kuhn kept pushing them away. "The doc's got more to live for," he gasped, his voice becoming weaker as his oxygen levels dropped. "Her research could help millions of people. Take care of the family first." Mina watched in stunned silence as the human medics worked frantically to save both patients. She realized that she wasn't just witnessing the legendary human-pack bonding behavior that had been mentioned in the reports. She was experiencing it firsthand, somewhere in the past 24 hours. Without any formal ceremony or declaration, these humans had quietly adopted the entire galactic diplomatic team into their extended family. And when crisis struck, they had responded with the same fierce protectiveness they would show their own children. It was both humbling and terrifying to realize that she now had an entire species willing to die for her, simply because they had decided she belonged with them. The War Council chamber aboard the human command station buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 12 different species gathered around a massive holographic display. For the first time in galactic history, ancient enemies sat side by side, united by a threat that made their old conflicts seem petty and meaningless. The crystal entities had been unstoppable in their advance across the galactic rim. 14. Entire star systems had been consumed, their planets stripped down to bare rock and their populations either dead or absorbed into the growing crystal network. What made the situation even more terrifying was that conventional military responses had proven completely useless. General June, a weathered human commander with scars that told stories of countless battles, manipulated the holographic display to show the pattern of crystal expansion. His fingers moved across the controls with practiced ease, highlighting system after system that had fallen to the relentless advance. "Look at this progression," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much destruction. "They're not just randomly consuming matter like we initially thought. They're learning from every engagement. Every ship they destroy, every weapon they encounter, every tactic we use against them makes them stronger and smarter." Admiral Taro, representing the combined galactic fleet, nodded grimly as he studied the data. Normally confident demeanor had been shaken by weeks of failed military operations. "Our conventional tactics have been completely ineffective," he admitted, the words clearly painful for a career military officer to speak. "We've thrown our best ships and our most experienced crews at them, and our combined fleets have barely managed to scratch their surface." The holographic display showed battle after battle where galactic forces had engaged the crystal entities, using standard military doctrine, energy weapons, coordinated fleet movements, defensive formations, strategic retreats. Everything that had worked against conventional enemies for thousands of years had failed against these new invaders. That's when human Commander Ray stepped forward from where she had been quietly observing the discussion. Sheetha, alien commanders, began to nod, thinking this sounded like a reasonable, if desperate, plan. Then Ray continued. "When they adapt to our weapons and start winning, which they will, we take our biggest, heaviest ships and ram them straight down their throats, loaded with fusion bombs set to detonate on impact." The silence that followed was deafening. Captain Hannah was the first to find her voice. "Commander, that's not a battle plan. That's a suicide mission. You're talking about deliberately destroying your own ships with crews still aboard." Ray nodded. "Without hesitation? For most species, yeah, that would be suicide. But we're humans. We're from a planet that's been actively trying to kill us since before our ancestors figured out how to use tools. Suicide missions aren't heroic last stands for us. They're just Tuesday." She gestured to the other human officers in the room who were nodding in agreement with her assessment. Every human child grows up knowing that sometimes the only way to survive is to do something that looks insane to everyone else. Our entire evolutionary history is based on turning impossible situations into victories by being too stubborn to accept defeat. As Ray continued explaining the human approach to warfare, something remarkable happened. The alien commanders began to understand that they weren't just hearing a desperate military strategy. They were getting a glimpse into the mindset of a species that had never learned the difference between survival and warfare. Because on their world, they had always been the same thing. The plan violated every principle of civilized galactic warfare, but as the humans walked them through the reasoning, the impossible began to make sense. The Battle of Kepler Nebula began at dawn. Galactic Standard Time, though in the depths of space, there was no real dawn or dusk. What there was, however, was the moment when the largest combined fleet in galactic history faced off against a crystal swarm that had already devoured 14 star systems. Admiral Taro stood on the bridge of the Harmony, watching his human vessels took their positions at the front of the formation. What he witnessed in those first moments would haunt his dreams for years to come. Not because it was terrifying, but because it was beautiful in the most savage way imaginable. The human ships began broadcasting something across all communication channels. It wasn't tactical information or battle commands. It was singing. Hundreds of human voices joined together in harmonies that seemed to come from the depths of their souls, chanting words and languages that predated their spaceflight by thousands of years. "What are they doing?" asked Navigator Yoon, his voice filled with confusion. Orsong's Admiral Taro replied, having learned about this human tradition during their diplomatic meetings. "They're singing the same songs their ancestors sang before battles, when they still fought with metal weapons on their planet's surface." The crystal entities responded to the approaching fleet exactly as predicted. They began adapting their surfaces, shifting and changing to counter the energy weapons being fired at them. Their crystalline bodies absorbed the blasts and converted the energy into new defensive measures, just as they had done in every previous engagement. But the humans had never intended to rely on energy weapons. Commander Yuki watched from his position as the human fleet suddenly broke formation and began using vessels that had never been designed for combat. Mining ships equipped with asteroid-breaking charges flew directly into crystal formations. Agricultural vessels that normally carried grain across star systems suddenly became delivery systems for improvised explosives. The most shocking moment came when a human grain transport called the Prairie Wind accelerated past the fleet's defensive perimeter. Its cargo holds had been packed with every explosive device the humans could find. Its captain guided it straight into the core of the largest crystal entity. The explosion that followed was beyond anything in the tactical manuals. The chain reaction shattered not just the target, but 3 additional crystal entities that had been positioned nearby. The shockwave from the blast sent crystal fragments spinning through space like deadly confetti. And where those fragments struck other enemies, they caused secondary explosions. "They're not just fighting, tactical officer," Sung reported, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and terror that everyone on the bridge could hear. "They're creating new weapons and tactics in the middle of the battle. Every time they engage an enemy, they learn something new about how to kill it more effectively." The tide of battle truly turned when human boarding parties began targeting what their scientists had identified as control nodes within the crystal entities. These were areas where the enemy's consciousness seemed to be concentrated, deep inside the alien constructs where environmental conditions broke down into chaos. While other species would have tried to attack these nodes with long-range weapons or automated probes, the humans did something that defied all logic. They strapped on environmental suits, grabbed whatever weapons they could carry, and personally boarded the crystal entities to fight hand-to-hand. Combat inside structures where the basic laws of physics no longer applied, Commander Yuki watched. His tactical displays as human soldiers fought in conditions that should have been impossible to survive. Inside the crystal entities, gravity shifted randomly. Temperatures fluctuated between extremes that would kill most life forms instantly, and the very air seemed to be made of crystalline particles that should have shredded their lungs. But the humans adapted. When their weapons stopped working in the altered physics, they used the crystal fragments as blades. When their communications equipment failed, they developed hand signals. When their environmental suits were breached, they held their breath and kept fighting until they could reach their objectives. What should have been a massacre of brave, foolhardy humans became a systematic destruction of enemy command centers. One by one, the crystal entities began losing coordination, as their control nodes were destroyed by soldiers who simply refused to die. In the aftermath of the battle, as crystal fragments drifted through space like glittering snow, the combined galactic fleet floated in stunned silence. They had just witnessed something that would be remembered for millennia. The moment when Deathworlders showed the galaxy what evolution under impossible conditions could create. They hadn't just seen survivors, or even warriors. They had witnessed the birth of a species that could turn any situation, no matter how hopeless, into a victory through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. 3 months had passed since the Battle of Kepler Nebula, and the galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened. The crystal entities that had seemed unstoppable just a few months earlier were now nothing more than scattered fragments drifting through space. Their threat ended by a species that most of the galaxy had never heard of until recently. The Galactic Council chambers had never seen such a gathering. Representatives from every known species packed the Great Hall, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes that stretched as far as the eye could see. But despite the diversity of the crowd, everyone was focused on the same thing: the small group of humans sitting quietly in the center of the room, Representative Khan. His dignified Altarian features, showing the strain of recent events, stood at the central podium with a formal document that had taken weeks to prepare. The proposal he was about to read represented the unanimous decision of the Galactic Council, something that had never happened before in recorded history. After extensive deliberation and careful consideration of recent events, Khan began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Humanity is hereby offered full membership in the Galactic Council with protected species status. The offer was unprecedented. Protected species status was reserved for civilizations that showed great promise, but were considered too vulnerable to survive without galactic support. It included military protection from any threats, advanced technological sharing to help them develop faster, and preferential trade agreements that would make them wealthy within a few generations. This offer includes complete military protection from all external threats, access to our most advanced technologies, and economic support. To ensure your species' rapid development and prosperity, Khan continued, reading from the formal document. The Galactic Council recognizes humanity's contribution to galactic security and wishes to ensure your continued survival and growth. The human delegation, led by Ambassador Su, listened politely throughout the entire presentation. A small woman by human standards, but her presence seemed to fill the room as she rose to respond to the Council's offer. "We are deeply honored by this generous proposal," Ambassador Su began, her voice calm and measured. "The Galactic Council's offer of protection and support shows a kindness that we will never forget." Representatives from dozens of species leaned forward, expecting to hear acceptance of what was clearly the most generous offer ever made to a newly discovered civilization. However, Su continued, and the single word sent a ripple of surprise through the chamber. "We must respectfully decline the protection portion of your offer." The silence that followed was so complete that you could have heard a pin drop in the vast chamber. Species that had fought wars for centuries over much smaller offers were watching humans turn down galactic protection as if it were a minor inconvenience. "You see," Su explained, her tone remaining friendly but firm, "our planet spent 4 billion years actively trying to kill us. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, plagues, predators, natural disasters that would destroy entire civilizations. If we survived all of that, we're not particularly worried about anything else the galaxy might throw at us." She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing.
Out!
What we would be honored to accept is partnership. Equal membership in the Galactic Council, mutual defense pacts where we help protect each other, and shared exploration initiatives where we work together to discover what's out there in the unknown regions of space. The proposal was so unexpected that several representatives began talking among themselves, trying to understand why anyone would choose equality over protection. But Admiral Taro, watching from the observation deck, understood perfectly. From his vantage point, he could see human exploration vessels in the docking bays below, their crews preparing for journeys to the galactic core and beyond. These ships weren't heavily armed warships or massive colony vessels. They were exploration craft, designed for discovery rather than conquest. That evening, Admiral Taro made an entry in his personal journal that would eventually become required. Reading at military academies across 12 different species, we came to rescue them from their impossible world and their unwinnable war. Instead, they rescued us all. The humans have taught us that sometimes the best way to survive is to be too stubborn to die and too loyal to let others die alone. They call it the human way. I call it hope. He paused in his writing, watching through his cabin window as the first human exploration vessel departed for the galactic core, its crew singing one of their ancient songs as they began their journey into the unknown. Then he added one final line that would become legendary among military strategists. Note to future galactic conflicts: always check if humans are available. If yes, invite them. If no, postpone until they are. The age of human partnership with the galaxy had begun.